How's it going, YouTube? Got FourthStarTCG here, and today I'd like to talk about the death of grading middleman companies. It feels like this has been coming for a long time, but things have really picked up in the last couple of weeks with the issues with Ludkins UK and PSA. But I really think this is a continuation of a long-term trend and a sign of what's to come. So today I just want to discuss grading middlemen, why people used them in the past, why they were so great before all of the craziness, what's happened to make grading middlemen really not as attractive anymore, and why all of this has happened, right? Why are we seeing so many problems with grading middlemen right now? So it really feels like there's been a slow burn, but then a giant explosion with grading middlemen companies. There's been, things here and there over the past year and a half or so with grading middlemen. And just recently, it feels like there's been a giant blow up where people are really starting to realize that, hey, these companies are pretty much done. We've had things like Graded Gem UK losing that package of customers' cards and then not telling them about it because they were negotiating the insurance settlement, not telling them about it for months. That was a kind of red flag that popped up and said, "Ooh, goodness," people weren't too happy about things then. Then there was the issue with all middlemen companies with cards taking forever to get back. Your backlog submissions from PSA taking close to 2 years for some people to get their cards back. People in Europe, it's even worse. People in Europe, I have friends who've taken over 2 years to get their cards back. And then you have the bankruptcy issues. You had Mark's Cards. They were a huge group submitter in the sports card area. They went bankrupt, and PSA had to work individually with individual submitters to return their cards. Now we've got the whole Ludkins UK issue with the issues that they're having with what appears to be similar to Mark's Cards, an inability to pay for orders that were customers had already paid for. They paid Ludkins up front, and now Ludkins can't pay PSA when the charges come due. It's really just been a disaster for these grading middleman companies. And I think for people who haven't been in the hobby for as long as others, who maybe just came in during the pandemic or, at any time in the last couple of years, they may not be familiar with why people use these grading middleman companies, right? Why are you submitting via these companies? What do they do for you? It's just been a constant stream of negativity. But in the past, these middleman companies were really, really helpful. Middleman companies in the past, they were cheaper than submitting direct to PSA. Usually you got at least $1 less per card than PSA's cheapest bulk rate outside of specials. Usually it took less effort to submit your cards because you didn't have to deal with that whole PSA online submission thing. The middleman company, they do it for you. All you had to do was package your cards, send them off, and the middleman company would take care of everything. So that was really, really good for a lot of people, that they didn't have to navigate PSA's interface. It's kind of confusing, pretty challenging if you don't know how to use it. It was also, they also offered things like better insurance than what you'd get submitting direct to PSA, and all sorts of kind of other perks, especially on the higher end level for people who were submitting large amounts of cards. So these middleman services used to be very attractive, and vast majority of people would submit to them. Myself, I submitted direct to PSA for several years. Then I switched to submitting via middleman service because it was cheaper and easier. That's pretty much it. Why would you not want to do something that takes less work and costs less money? But over the past, year and a half, again, we've really seen this kind of downfall. And the big question that people have as to, the big question people have is why, right? Why do we get from these middleman companies being cheaper easier, just all around better, the logical choice if you wanted to submit cards to PSA. And you know, when I was talking about things being easier, I didn't even mention things like if you're overseas and the issues with submitting overseas to PSA, having a middleman service for that makes things much easier. And that's where middleman services originally started. You know, Ludkins UK, the original middleman service, all kinds of group submitters from Europe. But as I mentioned, the big question is why, right? Why did we go from the logical choice to the complete debacle that we're in now, where it seems like almost every middleman service has some sort of problem going on, whether they're, you know, taking years to return cards well beyond, you know, PSA saying we cleared the backlog, but middleman orders still outstanding, whether they're going bankrupt, you know, all this kind of stuff that seems to have its feelers out to every middleman service. So I want to hit on two reasons for why middleman services are failing and will likely, you know, not survive much longer unless they operate at a much smaller scale. And the reasons I want to highlight are PSA and other grading companies screwing the middleman services and the middleman services screwing themselves. So first, let's talk about PSA screwing the middleman services. So the pandemic really is just at the forefront of everything here. And these middleman services, the way that they make money is through people submitting cards to PSA through them, effectively, right? These middleman services, they negotiate a direct rate through PSA, much lower than PSA's normal submission fees. And then they charge customers a higher rate, but usually still lower than what PSA was charging. And then they pocket the difference, right? That's their profit, is the difference in grading fees that PSA charges them versus what they charge you. So middleman companies, the only way that they make money is if they take in submissions for PSA or other grading companies, right? So when PSA shuts down, right, when they shut down bulk, value, everything up through, you know, your express during the pandemic, and they, you know, don't reopen bulk submissions and don't give dealers a really significant access to that, these dealers have no money. They have no income, right? So when these dealers, when these group submitters have no income, and PSA is not helping them, right? PSA doesn't fund these middleman services. The only way they get money is if they accept submissions for PSA. And PSA, to the best of my knowledge, wasn't really negotiating deals on these super expensive tiers, right? You know, who's paying $280 a card to go through a middleman service when you pay $300 just to submit direct to PSA? You know, not many people were submitting at that level anyway. So even if there was, you know, dealer options there, group submitter options there, you know, you couldn't make any money off of it. So these middleman services effectively had to rely on the information that they got from PSA from, okay, when are we reopening value? When are we reopening bulk? And all of that. And I just know that the information that collectors got from PSA was wildly off, right? PSA said we'll be back open in 2 months originally for the backlog, right? What a load of crap that was, you know? So I don't know what middleman companies were told behind the scenes, but if middleman companies were told that, hey, we're opening up sooner and that, you know, you can get back to your normal revenue stream quickly, these middleman companies probably would have done things a lot differently if they had known that PSA was going to effectively be shut down for a year, if not longer, for the lower service tiers, right? So that's one way that PSA screwed the middleman services, was being shut down for so long and not being clear to collectors, and I would assume the middleman services, I don't have any insider information as to this, about their plans to reopen. The second way that PSA screws the middleman services is by deprioritizing their orders. You know, even outside of all the payment issues that have come up, it's very clear that when the backlog really started to get going, PSA deprioritized the middleman orders, where they did not get through these middleman orders as quick as direct submissions. The middleman orders went to the back of the line, which created the perception that these middleman orders were less than, right? We've been seeing this for a long time, that people who submitted direct through PSA during the backlog era got their cards back quicker than if you submitted via middleman service, and often it was much longer. The backlog has effectively been cleared for a very long time, but people are still missing middleman orders, even absent all of the kind of payment issues that have been cropping up. So that's how PSA screwed the middleman, right? It's by shutting down during the pandemic, completely cutting off the revenue streams of these middleman services. These are people with businesses, with staff, with large operations, which run these. And you have to have accurate information on this in order to run your business. And if that wasn't provided, if PSA wasn't clear to these middleman services, then things that might contribute to some of the payment issues that we're seeing now. But can't lay all the blame at PSA's feet. The middleman services have screwed up as well. So with the issue of the pandemic and not having all of these grading fees coming in, middlemen services, what very much seems to have happened is that middlemen services dipped into the money that they had set aside to pay for grading fees and used it to cover expenses, which in no circumstances should be done, because that's the money that your customers have paid for grading fees. Again, if middlemen services, they want to operate on that profit, right, that extra per card amount that they charge in order to make their money, that's one thing. But when they dip into the fees that they were supposed to be paying PSA, that is, bad management. And that certainly seems like what has happened with things like Mark's Cards, with things like Ludkin's UK, is that when the bill comes due, these services, these middlemen have not been able to pay it. They do not have the money on hand in order to pay out for their customer orders. And, of course, this is unacceptable because the customers have already paid, right? They paid at the beginning of the grading process. And effectively, these companies got a giant loan from their customers, right? Because PSA only charges at the end of the submission process, right? Everyone who goes direct through PSA knows this. There's jokes about, the beginner's guide to leveraged finance being submitting cards to PSA with a credit card, because effectively all you do is you just wait for the charges to hit the card. You get your submission back, you sell a couple cards, and pay off the grading fees on your credit card before the bill comes due. All of this is like your extra fedora tipper flipper mindset, but that's what people do. Leverage finance by backloading the charges on your credit card. That's what people do. They take advantage of the fact that PSA charges at the end of the process and go with that. But effectively, these companies, these middlemen companies, had customer loans. The customers gave them the money up front. They paid up front for this. And that money, appears allegedly to have been mismanaged. And, the middleman companies, not even just in the issue of non-payment, but also in communication. An issue with all middleman companies has been a lack of communication over the backlog, a lack of communication over turnaround times, lack of communication over what's still outstanding. Some things have gotten better from what I've heard, but overall it's still very challenging for people to get in contact with these middleman companies, probably because they don't have any money, so they can't pay any staff. So this has just been a total fiasco, a total disaster with middleman companies, and my prognosis is that it's done. It's over. I don't think we're going to be seeing any more large-scale middleman companies to the scale of, Ludkin's, Graded Gem, Ludkin's US, Ludkin's UK. They're different entities. It's kind of important to keep that distinction there. Nothing with Ludkins UK is affecting Ludkins US unless you have a small number of CGC submissions. I think there's an issue there. But again, it touches everything, right? You know, if you submit it with Polaris, which is like run an offshoot, it's like Ludkins. The meme is like, is Polaris just Ludkins rebranded? But effectively, yes, it is. And there was an issue with Polaris submitting cards to CGC using a Ludkins UK account. And now, of course, since Ludkins UK can't pay the bills, there's problems. Who knows? Even though Polaris has the money to pay for the cards, obviously. They're submitted under the UK account, and I don't know. I read one E4 thread on this, and, you know, I'm just kind of spitballing here. But all that goes to show is that these problems have their feelers everywhere, right? This is a industry-wide issue. And I really think the fall of Ludkins UK and effectively, you know, Graded Gem and Ludkins US, that's just going to tank the whole industry effectively. I don't see anyone on a large scale feeling comfortable with submitting via Middleman anymore. I think people are just going to, you know, learn their way through the PSA interface. You know, yes, there's a barrier to entry there, but, you know, do you really want to risk your cards getting lost? Do you want to risk the middleman service not having the money to pay for them when the bill comes due? I don't think so. So that's my take on middleman services, the slow burn to giant explosion of the entire middleman grading kind of environment. It's pretty sad. You know, it is really sad to see these companies that used to provide a really exceptional amount of value just become really nothing through both the incompetence of PSA and the incompetence of these middleman services. And, you know, I really think you can't assign blame 100% on either party, right? Obviously, the middleman services, they've screwed up a ton, but PSA is not entirely blameless in this to begin with. So let me know your thoughts on the middleman fiasco, and yeah, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stick around for more videos.